Everybody to the Audit, Risk and Finance meeting of December. Apologies, have apologies from the Mayor for lateness. She will be here, I understand, soon. Thank you. Is there any discussion on that? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. No change to the order of business. Interests. Are there any updates to the interest register or statements of conflict relating to matters on the specific agenda? No, thank you. Public forum. We have no public forum notified of or anything that I'm aware of. So we'll move to the minutes of the meeting of the 10th of November. Do I have somebody prepared to move it?
I want to make a comment about that. Just in section 8, where it talks about the delays to the audit, I just really feel that the minutes should have reflected, shall we say, our disappointment, that being my polite word, in the delays and the process around that. And the fact that we, they still couldn't give us clear timeframes around that, because that disappointment was expressed quite clearly at the meeting, and I think the minutes actually should reflect that.
Thank you, Councillor Edgar. Can we make sure that those comments are noted at this point in the statement around the acceptance or the consideration of those minutes? Are there any other comments in relation to those minutes? With that note to the minutes, then, would somebody move? Thank you, Councillor Edgar. Do I have a seconder for those? So, Mr. Murray, thank you. Is there any other further discussion? If not, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. So it brings us to Chairperson's report. I'll take my report as read. Just noting, warmly welcome our new elected councillor representative on this. So thank you, Matt. Good to have you on board.
Good to be on board. Thank you very much. It's I'd like for the record to show that I am a team player, because I wasn't actually at the council meeting where it was decided that I would be on this committee. I had no input into that decision at all. It's also a reminder that you should always go to every council meeting so that you're there when these things happen. But I did have a long-standing commitment, so I couldn't be there. But no, it's a good opportunity to learn new things and make a new contribution. So pleased to be here.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So I look forward to working with you all in this new format, and I would move that my report be received. Thank you, Councillor Edgar. Any further comment on that? Right, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We come then to item 7, which is the policy review of the procurement policy. And presume I asked Arlene. I was looking around. Arlene, would you like to join the table and talk us through this? Any changes subsequent to the report, or anything you'd like to highlight about the report before I open it up for questions?
Thank you. Through the chair, I think before we head into the discussion around that, I'd really like to just let committee members know that I think for council, this proposed policy represents a new way forward for us. And in terms of making a real statement about what does this council stand for, what are our principles, and the type of change that we want to see happen. Historically, we've, in terms of procurement, we've taken quite a standard approach in terms of price has been very important to us, quality and deliverables. And this policy is a way for us to start expanding and to think wider than that. An opportunity for officers when they're approaching procurements to really think very carefully about what other outcomes we want from this particular purchase that are beyond what's the price. So I'm personally really proud of this piece of work, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. Councillor Edgar.
Firstly, just like to thank you for your work on this, Arlene. Just on page 24, which is page 2 of the policy, third bullet point down under 5.1, it talks about the health, safety, environmental, economic, social and cultural outcomes to be achieved. Just wondering, I guess, you know, so greenhouse gas emissions are quite specifically listed and rightfully so. I just wonder if by putting all of those other outcomes together, it does in some way water them down or bury them. Next bullet point, for example, is sort of quite clear that, you know, consider council's role in encouraging suppliers to, et cetera, and again, they're good, but I'm just wondering if that third bullet point, has the risk of burying some of the, for example, the social impacts or the cultural impacts that might be delivered along with whatever it is we're procuring. Can you just address that and how you see that playing out?
Yes, through the chair. So at the policy level, this is supposed to be a series of statements that enable officers to explore these possibilities through procurements. At the operational level, there'll be some changes along the way. This is a starting point, and the tools that we give officers to help them consider these aspects will, I guess, become more and more specific as time goes on. And as we're getting more experience of the results from this policy. So to begin with, for example, we might ask a series of questions, things that we want suppliers to do, to work towards. In years to come, that might look different. So the supporting tools are, I think, what will give the best effect to this.
Okay, thank you. When you're ready, I'd like to be able to move this.
Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Sanson first, and then Councillor Laurie.
Thanks, through the chair. Kia ora, Arlene. I'm just delighted to see this policy come through. So thanks for all your work on it. Yeah, really, really fantastic. So my first question is page 16, 5.8. The paragraph about the living wage, and there's an estimate there of minimum 200,000 additional operation expenditure per year for having the living wage as part of this. And I was just wondering, is there any additional information behind that? Like, is that just kind of a back of the envelope kind of calculation, or has there been some work done on it?
Through the chair, yes, there was some work done on this. So we looked at our contracts and approached our contractors specifically in areas around operational services, ongoing services and ongoing maintenance. Those are the areas where it's easiest to make this kind of estimate. And we've approached those suppliers and asked them to give us information about what the difference in cost would be of those contracts each year if we were to ask them to pay a living wage to all of their staff. So what the difference in the contract price would be for us. So we have had those costs confirmed by the suppliers. I think I included it in the report, but I think I should point out that that doesn't include an estimate of any additional work. Yeah. So often in our service and maintenance contracts, we have fixed services that we pay for, and it's on that basis that these calculations have been made. We don't have estimates on any additional work that we might ask them to do, but on the fixed services that we're expecting and the supplier is expecting to deliver, that's where the cost estimates have come in.
And so if you know off the top of your head, and apologies for not sending this through in advance, it's been a big week for me. Do you know if that sum of 200,000 includes, for example, our cleaning contract that has already been renegotiated to include at living wage level?
Through the chair, I can confirm that our cleaning contract suppliers confirmed that they were already paying a living wage.
So the 200,000 is for contractors who are not yet. Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that one there for the moment. Then my next question is page 18, 8.1. So the second sentence that talks about the streamlined capital works program remaining in place until the 30th of June 2022, is that a decision that is to be made or has already been made? And if you could just, my understanding, it was through the COVID, it was a COVID response that there was going to be a streamlined process. I thought it was for about 12 months. So I'm just wondering if you've got any information about that.
Through the chair, maybe Ms Harrison could respond to that question. My understanding was that the streamlined procurement process was initially approved through to end of June 2021 and that there had been a subsequent discussion about retaining that until June 2022. And I think that that was potentially around the length of the contracts and the timing for award of contracts.
So through the chair, yes, I'm not over all the detail in terms of the decision making, but what I was aware of is that really it's around continuing our ability to deliver the capital program in a really timely manner, because it's proving really successful this year. There's a lot of activity out there. We've been able to hit the ground running in terms of getting works complete, up and on site before Christmas. And so I think the idea was really around continuing that economic stimulus for longer than it originally planned.
Sure. So is this report forming the decision to do that, or has that decision been made, or is it coming to another
Not part of this decision report.
Okay. So but the decision, because I don't believe the decisions come to the table of any of the meetings I've been on. So I'm not against it. I'm just curious as to the decision-making process around it. No.
I'll have to follow up.
Okay, thanks. If that could just be maybe noted somewhere, that if the committee members could just get an update on the status of that decision. So as it's unknown what the status of that decision is, my question actually goes to this policy, if it's adopted, will become effective the 1st of February 2021. If we are going to roll over the streamlined contracting process until June 2022, does that actually negate or detract from the ability to introduce broader outcomes from 2021? So the February 2021 date, are we missing out on 18 months of potentially broader outcome decision making?
Through the chair, thank you. I understand the question. The answer is no, it doesn't. In terms of the capital work program, which the streamlined process applies to, the steps that would normally be taken before going to approach the market in either a closed or an open competitive process remain in place. So the thinking about what do we want to achieve from this and working out what we want and how much of that we're going to ask for, that's still part of the streamlined process. The streamlined part of the process, the streamlining, is about a more efficient approach to the market. So working with a group of suppliers who have been named for award of construction works, and there's a quite specific process that they go around. It's I want to be clear that it's not just giving work to people directly. There's a mini procurement process around it, but that has to still involve the thinking about what do we want.
Okay. So my understanding then is that we would have we have for the streamlined process a group of, say, vetted suppliers. Would they be updated about the changes to our procurement policy, or would it not impact any of those decisions until after June 2022?
Through the chair, my understanding of how this will work is that within the capital projects team, when they're defining their requirements and talking with their suppliers, they will be talking about these requirements. So the requirements of the new policy in terms of considering those outcomes, those other outcomes that we want to achieve, will form part of that requirements process. So with the streamlined process for capital works, there's still a need to have that discussion with the supplier and express what we want. I can't answer straight away whether Ms Plum has organised with that supplier group to give them an update on the policy, but I believe that will be happening.
Okay, thanks. And so then my last question is page 23. 1.1, just the first sentence where it says it supports council to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions and council operations by 2050. So my question here really is that my understanding is that council has adopted an emissions policy, or we did pass a piece of a policy a couple of months ago where we were going to actually align with the government targets. So I'm just curious as to the wording in here. Does that kind of lock us into something which might put us into misstep with the government targets? So just that there are signals, I guess, that government targets may be being brought forward because of New Zealand's current track record as being, I think, the second worst after Turkey in terms of the Annex 1 countries, in terms of actually increasing our emissions 57% since the 1990 baseline till now. So I just want to make sure that we are in alignment with the government targets for reduction. So as I would say, equally ambitious, not less ambitious.
Through the chair, I think that we would deal with that operationally at the process level. I think that at the time we had the targets for 2050 from the government, and I think that what the policy is speaking to is that as a local authority, we're serious about this, and if there's more stringent targets to meet, we will deal with that operationally at the process level. If necessary, to make a change to the policy as the time comes, that will be a decision for this subcommittee.
Would it be possible to just change the wording to say something like to align with council targets? Because I guess we have a policy, it just doesn't lock us. Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure really whether that's something we can do now or how that would go, or whether even the committee thinks it's relevant or not. But it might just save a little piece of work if our or government targets change. If we just kind of say that this policy is in alignment with council targets, then we are kind of this policy kind of fits with our other policies.
Thank you. Through the chair, I was trying to find the right place in the policy. I thought I had something in there about this. So at point 4.4 of the policy, there is discussion around, it's one of our objectives is to ensure purchasing decisions are guided by the underlying principle of minimising greenhouse gas emissions. And there's some discussion in there to comply with emission reduction targets prescribed by council, or in the absence of a council target is prescribed by the Climate Change Response Act. Does that cover it?
So that absolutely covers it. I think it's just that the 1.1, it's kind of the opening paragraph, and it just could, if targets change different to this, then we could find that this policy is inconsistent with itself or with other council policies. Just, is there a solution, or wondering what people's thoughts are? How do we go about kind of addressing this kind of thing? Just so,
Well, I think if the subcommittee was to support a wording change to that, then we could ask for that to be made prior to this being presented to council.
Okay.
It wouldn't need to come back here, I don't think, for a change of that nature.
I would like to suggest that. I'm not asking for it to be anything different than what it is and what our targets are, only that there's consistent
Understand that,
clarity.
yeah. So is there an appetite from the committee to change that wording to reflect alignment with government targets at all times?
I'd support that.
Okay.
Council or government?
Government target, isn't it?
So I think it's so basically council has a climate change policy that we will meet government targets. So I think we should align with the council policy.
The council policy, which is to meet
exactly. And
targets,
then if we change the council policy around our emissions reduction, at least we're still in alignment with our own policy.
That's okay.
Is that?
Yep, so to align with those council targets aligned. So yeah, I think
Do I
we're
need to
getting.
propose an amendment, or can we just?
No, I think it's just something we can ask to as a suggested change. It doesn't. I don't think it needs an amendment to that. I think I need to pick that up and reflect that in the form that goes to council.
Okay, thanks.
And we will just note that when the time comes, we might just change the wording of the second part of the resolution to say with suggested changes. So.
Okay, thanks very much. That's all my questions for Arlene. I guess that I would also like to signal that I would like to make an amendment to part 2 of the recommendation, or that the council approves the amended Nelson City Council procurement policy, and maybe put an additional bullet point in there that council adopts a living wage policy.
Yeah, I wouldn't. This report contains reference to that, but doesn't actually cover a recommendation through this committee to council about council adopting a minimum wage policy. So I think it's outside of
that
this.
Would be best left to council.
To a council meeting, I think directly rather than going through here. We haven't seen any of the.
Sure. So I'm
that.
happy to second. I'd like to second the recommendations then.
Okay. Well, I'll take any further questions first before that comes up, and I have Councillor Laurie, then Mr. Murray. I had Councillor Laurie first.
Mr. Chair, if I could, through you, I just want to come back to Councillor Sanson's question on the amendment around the living wage, and the reason I'd like to come back to that is I think where Councillor Sanson is thinking, and I have a similar concern, is that when we reflect on the greenhouse gas emissions, she's looking for integration for this policy to integrate with the council policy on admissions, which integrates with the government. So there's a cascade, and I can quite clearly see that. Part of my questioning for this morning is around the living wage and where that fits within the council policy itself as an overriding policy. And Councillor Sanson is sort of saying, well, let's refer it back to the council policy on that. It's a wee bit of a chicken and egg situation, because I'm on the other side going, I don't know how we can support this policy with the living wage stuff in there unless there is a council policy on it that we can refer to give us context. So it's the same point as Councillor Sanson, but the other way around. I don't think, my thinking around, subject to some answers, I don't think that this policy as it currently sits, can actually sit by itself without reference to the living wage stuff, which is ongoing elsewhere within the council and has a council policy.
There
So-
isn't actually a council policy on the living wage, so
Is there?
there isn't.
Yes, well, that's,
So this is referencing the government policy on broader outcomes.
so your point is around there should be a council policy on living wage, which we should reference to here.
No, I would like council to adopt. I would like council to adopt living wage. So
I think we see the issue that's happening here. You wanted to make a comment first. I'll come back to you, Councillor Laurie.
So through the chair, there is actually a report coming. There's been a request for a report to come back to council anyway, so it's already sort of on the books around the living
fantastic.
wage.
Thanks very much.
So,
Thanks.
but you know, you would actually have to take advice and take, understand the full implications before making that decision. And the procurement policy is not saying that living wage is mandatory, so it's.
Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So before I get to my questions, I would like to make a comment on that very topic. I think the procurement policy, the draft policy, reflects what politicians like to call the direction of travel of this council. It has been an ongoing conversation. There have been, bits of work done leading up to this that reflect council's will to see more living wage in council operations. So to my mind, what I'm reading here fits with that. Those are my feelings. But to my questions, Mr. Chairman, and it's a bit of a back to basics, I'm afraid, because I'm the new kid on the block. First of all, with the buy local part of the policy, which I totally agree with, historically, one of the conversations I've had with a lot of people in Nelson is they say, why do we buy art from people who aren't from Nelson? Nelson is an arts community. We should just buy Nelson artists' work for public artworks. And I understand that, but my response has always been, well, do you want Wellington City Council to say that they're not going to buy any work from Nelson artists? And if they're artists, typically they go, oh no, I want that. So I'm just wondering, is there, while I like what I'm reading, is there the potential for a bit of blowback or pushback in terms of us adopting that policy across all our procurement practices in terms of other operations, other things we do, buy and sell?
Through the chair, well, it's possible. So at the operational level, how this works is it's a consideration about whether those skills are available locally. And it's a decision point whether for a particular purchase, whether we do want to ring fence that to our region. For other purchases, particularly where there's maybe some specialist skills, or maybe it's just the weight of what a supplier can bring, we would want to extend that beyond Nelson. So it's kind of on a sliding scale of this is appropriate to ring fence this procurement to suppliers in Nelson, and everyone's going to get a good outcome from that. And at the other end of the scale, well, we need to hear from everyone. We're going to run an open process that's open to anyone from the country, and we're not going to favour local suppliers with additional points when we evaluate. And that's another way at the operational level. We might give some favour to local suppliers, but still have a purchase that anyone can be in competition for. So it's really back to the significant change in terms of the way that we, as Nelson City Council, buy things, because it's about saying right up front, you have to think about these things. You need to do your research and you need to work out what's going to get the best outcome for everyone.
Right. Next question through the chair. How does this procurement policy compare to other local government procurement policies when it comes to being progressive and doing things in new ways?
Through the chair, we are seeing quite progressive policies and procurement strategies coming from councils like Auckland Council, and there's others. Some councils have been working towards quite detailed other wider outcomes in their procurement only in specific areas. And other councils, for example, along top of the south, ours is probably the most advanced in terms of looking at wider outcomes. Our neighbouring councils, their policies on their websites show reviews from last year. They may have work underway. I couldn't comment on that today. But this policy, I believe, is a step forward.
Right, thank you, and apologies for not getting the questions to you before the meeting, but I appreciate the answer. Next, in terms of what does this policy do in terms of enhancing opportunities, or does it enhance opportunities for new suppliers?
Through the chair, I believe it does. The change from the current thresholds in terms of dollar figures that we have in the existing policy they were absolutely right at the time. The market has changed a lot, and the feedback that we've had from suppliers has helped influence some of this, and particularly in the kind of more lower value procurements that we do, we were getting feedback from suppliers that it was a big ask for them to enter into a full competitive process for work that was of lower value and less complexity and lower risk. So in those terms, the dollar thresholds that we're proposing in this policy to trigger open competitive or closed competitive or direct purchase means that those suppliers they have a better chance of participating, whereas previously we might not have heard from those suppliers because they would have looked at the type of process that we were running. They had to make a decision as to whether they're going to invest their time and money into bidding for that work, and they don't know if they're up against 20 other people. So it's a tough call for those smaller businesses and new suppliers in the market as to how much they invest in bidding for work. And in this way, we can make that process simpler for them.
That is really, really good news. I hope that if the policy is adopted, that we as council put a little bit of energy into getting the word out to the business sector about that, because it'll be wonderful if this does actually create some new opportunities for Nelson businesses. Just going back to art for a moment. This policy covers goods and services. Do we include public art or artworks in that?
Through the chair, in terms of installation of art, we have followed competitive processes around that in the past. I couldn't comment at this point about the selection of art. I believe that comes under a different process.
We've certainly run, as Arlene said, we've certainly run competitive processes previously, but there's like an art selection panel, isn't there? That kind of has a different role than a procurement policy.
Sure,
so.
Great, thank you. And finally, just a bit of clarification for me. If we do decide to recommend the policy to council, when would we expect it to come before full council?
So through the chair, the intention was to take it up to the December council meeting on the 17th.
Oh, great. Yeah.
So that we can have it effective from the 1st of February and all the processes lined up for that date.
Right. And so the decision on the living wage part of the policy will be made at that meeting?
Through the chair, I don't think that report's coming to that meeting. I don't think it's necessary to approve the policy for that report to come to that meeting.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Anything further, Councillor Laurie?
I need a bit more clarification on that. So on 5.8 it says, if council wishes to pursue this as a mandatory requirement for all suppliers and undertaking work for council, this is with regards to the living wage. So that question, so that decision where we decide that we want to will be in December. No. So if we,
Can somebody throw,
with regards to the living
Put some
wage, community
clarification.
council supplies, blah, 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 if council wishes to pursue this, so that decision gets made when?
When the report comes up to council next year sometime.
I see, the separate living wage.
Yeah, it's a separate report that takes advice around the implications of the living wage policy, and there was living wage accreditation raised as well.
Gotcha.
So it's the full implications of that decision, and obviously it has LTP considerations as well. So it has financial
Right, gotcha.
implications. So the procurement policy can flow through a different path.
Understood. Thank you.
okay, Mr. Murray.
So thank you. So just following on from that, if that paper indeed decides that living wage isn't where we're going, say, hypothetically, because we wouldn't want to predetermine these things without the paper and the recommendation, what would that mean for this policy then, if we approve it today? Would that mean we'd have to go back and adjust the policy to line up with that paper at that point in time?
Through the chair, I think it would perhaps be useful at this point if I offer some clarification around how this might work at the operational level. So in the policy, along with other areas, we're asking officers to consider to what extent they want to try and achieve some outcome in different areas. So one of those would be living wage outcomes for suppliers to council. So as an example, or as some examples, some of the things that we might do for a specific procurement is that we might ask suppliers to have a living wage policy or a plan that shows their commitment towards a living wage. And we might say, we'll only work with you if you have a plan around living wage. Or we might say, we're more likely to work with you if you have this plan. So that all comes down to how we evaluate those suppliers in any particular procurement. Or we might say, we'll still work with you if you're not paying a living wage, but we're setting an expectation that in the future, next time round, that's what we want. So it's kind of a sliding scale of what are we asking suppliers to do? And then beyond that, how much do we want them to do that? Are we going to stand firm behind those requirements, or are we going to say it's our preference, but we're going to still work with you if you don't do this? So it might give some clarity because at this point, it's a starting point. There, as has been pointed out, we don't have a policy from this council around living wage in terms of our suppliers. And so we have to have a starting point to start signalling this to our suppliers and signalling it to the community. And it's fair to say that there would be some suppliers out there, or perhaps some organisations that we're interested in working with. And if we made it mandatory for them to be paying a living wage to every person that's involved in this council contract, they might consider not bidding for that work, or potentially we would have to accept some increased costs in that contract that we haven't budgeted for. I hope that clarifies things. I'm not sure if it does, but I look on your face.
Yeah, no, it clarifies things. I get the flow and the nuance and where it's coming from, and I totally understand and get that. All I'm sort of suggesting is that if there's a variation between the paper that's coming midway through next year or at some stage next year on the living wage and this policy, and it could be we make it mandatory or we kick it for touch completely as a concept. So it doesn't mirror what's in here. It's different. Then what do we got to do? We'd have to come back and change this policy. And I'm not sure if we've got processes in place to come back and change the policy if indeed the subsequent decision makes this out of date, so to speak. Does that make sense? That makes sense to me, but
It does, and I think that's what would have to happen, Mr. Murray, if in fact the living wage didn't go through. However,
or it become mandatory.
We're undoubtedly faced with a situation of carts and horses here.
yes,
It would have been a lot easier no criticism implied here, but it would have been a lot easier had the living wage policy been adopted, and then this would slot nicely into it, as it has done with the greenhouse gas and the climate one in terms of those cross references. We're not at that point.
Yeah,
So, however, we have got a desire to do this as quickly as possible, and leaving it into the new year will delay the start date of early February, which again is not desirable. So that leaves us, excuse me, with the situation that if council was not to go with the living wage, there would be an element of hypocrisy that we could be exposed to if we left this policy as it is, when council did not actually have a similar one. So the alternate then would be, the option then would be to change this policy. Excuse me.
Okay, so so I suppose that if when we get to the point of approving the policy, would it be reasonable to expect that we would have a fairly strong indication that if indeed that work on the living wage, if it's at variance with this policy, then this policy be amended accordingly? Would that be a fair enough? Do we need to minute that, or is that just something we can capture in the minutes?
I think, yeah.
It's standard. Okay. All right. Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you. That sort of takes care of that for me. So look, the other question out of the living wage thing is the definition, where we're tying our policy to an organisation called the Living Wage Movement Aotearoa. Is it appropriate that we tie our policies to external parties that who knows who they are? That'd be a bit like tying it to the, I don't know, to something, the art society or something, I don't know. Is it appropriate that we tie our policy to a third party that we don't know who they are and or they're not another government department?
Through the chair, I think that's the only official living wage definition that exists at the moment in New Zealand. It would be a minor amendment to the policy to change that to the governance definition of the living wage as and when.
Okay. So again, something else that we could amend in the future if this organisation didn't prove to be robust enough, so to speak. Not saying that they're not. I don't know anything about them. I just find it a bit odd that we've got that here. Okay, who's on page 27, we 6.1 refer to purchases through AOG, but there's no definition for AOG. Should we put a definition in for AOG? Page 27, 6.1 exceptions, purchases through AOG arrangement. I didn't know
I
what
assumed it was all of
AOG
government personally.
Through the chair, at 5.3, I've discussed all of government brackets AOG contracts. Happy to include that in the definitions if needed.
Yep. Yeah, I was looking in the definitions for AOG. Yep, brilliant. Thank you. And look, final question. It's around the streamlined procurement policy that we have in place, and it's a slightly different tact on it, but it seems to me on the face of it that the streamlined procurement policy seems to be working pretty well. So if the streamlined procurement policy is working pretty well, why wouldn't we adopt it as normal policy in practice?
Through the chair, there's room in the draft policy, the draft proposed policy, to make further permanent arrangements along the same lines as the streamlined process we have for the capital works program, but it does need to go through another process. The streamlined procurement for the capital works program leverages some arrangements that were already in place and creates some new ones, and that's been by consultation and with everyone's agreement, all the parties involved. However, if we were to continue with a similar arrangement for the capital works program, I would expect to see a quite large, open, competitive process to be appointing a construction panel of suppliers. And that's a process that we should follow if we want to pursue that arrangement.
So that comes back to if that's working well for us now. And we believe that that's sustainably going to work well for us now. How do we incorporate that into here, or at some stage into here? Perhaps this is a 1 year review so that we can pick up the government policy on greenhouse gases, the living wage, and now a third item around streamlined practices.
Through the chair, what would happen is under the new policy, we would trigger a procurement process to appoint a construction panel, essentially is what would happen. And that's a project in its own right and requires some specialist input, some specialist procurement and legal input, and needs to be scheduled if that's the direction that council wants to take. Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Arlene.
Thank you. Is there any further questions? Councillor Edgar.
Yeah, sorry, I was just wondering if the recommendation to council should have the date it's effective. Thank you.
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you.
Dean.
So we've had a mover and a seconder. Councillor Edgar and Councillor Sanson. Is there any further discussion before I put the motion?
Yeah, Yeah.
Sorry, I'll take second and then I'll take the.
okay.
Thank you for.
So I'm just speaking in support of this policy. They say that a broader outcomes procurement policy like this is equivalent to spending $1 twice. It means that we're really kind of considering positive impact, not just economic outcomes, but also social, cultural and environmental in the way that we're making procurement decisions. The government introduced the broader outcomes procurement policy in 2018, and a number of councils around the country have already adopted improved procurement policies. So Nelson City Council is not a leader, but I would say that we are a fairly fast follower, and I'd just really like to acknowledge the fantastic work that the staff have done to kind of consider our own unique requirements in Nelson and for Nelson City Council, and then to adopt a really robust policy, which I think is absolutely going to be good for our community and for and for council and for ratepayers. So I think it's just a win-win-win policy, really, and I'm really proud of our staff and our committee. And yeah, for our council for bringing this forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sanson. Councillor Edgar, and then Councillor. I'll do yours at the end. So I'll take Councillor Laurie first.
Thanks. So it's quite nice for me to be at the meeting where this comes up. It's been my first meeting because it does herald a new way forward. And I think it's one of the best things to come out of council so far this term, and that's always nice to see things that make you feel like that. I note that the work on this started before most of us knew what COVID-19 was, or had heard of social distancing, or went anywhere near a hand sanitizer bottle ever. And yet, in many ways, this reads like a response to the challenges that the pandemic has put upon us. So I think it's incredibly timely, and I also think it's going to be very well received if it is adopted by not just the businesses of Nelson, but the people of Nelson, because I've been on council since 2013, and people tell you what they want and they tell you what they're upset about, and a lot of the concerns that I've heard over the last 7 years are addressed in this document, which I think shows just how council and staff have been listening, and I think that's really positive. So I'm looking forward to seeing it come to the full council table.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think they're really pleased with the process and the flow of what is here in this procurement policy. And what it does is start to formalise some of the work that we've done previously. So the living wage has been sitting within our documents now for the last few years is something that was important to us in consideration of evaluation. It's now more overt and you can see it, and we've got to the point, and I think we went through a tender process earlier this year where because the living wage was already signalled in the attributes, we were then able to take the step to actually take the next step to make sure that was actually occurred within the award of the tender. In terms of local procurement, again, that's been an important attribute that we wanted to have as part of our evaluation, and it has been used in terms of our processes previously, and I think that's a good thing. But just bringing this all together using the government framework, I think is very positive. I like the way that the team have worked on this as a journey, and we'll be working with through our procurement process to encourage people to take steps. It's not going to be outcomes, the big stick straight away, and if you haven't made these steps, then we don't want to talk to you again. It's actually about encouraging positive change, and I think that's been framed in absolutely the right way. So yeah, very confident with what is there. I look forward to reviewing it actually though, so I just think we'll have to think about when we come back and have a look to see how this is going. Is it achieving what we wanted to achieve, and are there any further adjustments that we want to make? But maybe we give it a good 12, 18 months to sort of bed in and then have a look at it. In terms of the Mr. Murray's comments just around the streamlined procurement process, I'm very pleased that we're continuing with that. I think that is important from what I can, from the feedback that we've had, particularly from the infrastructure team, it is working. And given the volume of work that is in front of us for economic stimulus in the region, it's really important that we continue that process. And again, I think one of the things that we do need to ask ourselves is that how we should be operating in the future, and not assume that we're going to go back to something that is going to be 2 years old and a way of working that is actually no longer fit for the future. And so this to me feels far more fit for the circumstances, but also fit for the future as a way of operating. So thanks to the team for getting it here. It's been a little while coming, but it's been worth the investment to get it right.
Thank you, Marys. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you. Look, I'm really happy to see this, and as the mover 5 months ago for a report that was already out of date, I think it's important we move forward today. Look, sometimes it's impossible to line all your ducks up, and while it might have been great to have already made a living wage decision, I actually think it's critically important that we move forward on this today, because I don't think our community deserves any more delays on getting those broader outcomes that they deserve. Council is a major purchaser in the local market, and there are so many opportunities that come from this. And whether it's just an opportunity that some of our major infrastructure suppliers might take on more apprentices, or as we've already identified, some may start paying the living wage or start moving towards it. That some businesses will see that we value that they have social impact as one of their bottom lines, and they don't just have dollars as their bottom lines, or that they have environmental outcomes as one of their bottom lines. And I think this shows that we value those businesses, those not-for-profits who see the broader benefits that our community needs, that our people deserve. I like how it is written, that it doesn't have that sense of absolutes. So we're not going to, I think as was said, we're not going to use the stick, we're going to use the carrot. And I think it would be good to, have a bit of a reporting back, even at a high level, on how it is meeting some of those outcomes. And so if it isn't, we can tweak it. But I'm just, delightfully happy to see the work that's gone into this, and really looking forward to council adopting it, but more so to see the benefits that can flow to our businesses, our not-for-profits, our iwi, and then the people that they work with. That's what our community needs. And as Matt said, it sort of feels like a COVID response, but it's actually how do we be good ancestors? While we've just adopted that as a Tika Ihu intergenerational strategy vision, council should and has always been about not just today. We always need to be looking forward, and this is a key part of looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So in that case, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you all. Thank you for your comments. And I'd just like to add to Ms. Aklak and the team, thank you for the work, for the result. And I think the comments around the importance of knowing how this is actually affecting things is really, really key. So I think some kind of review, looking at it, monitoring, however it is, I think everybody will be fascinated to see and hear that. So it doesn't stop here. Thank you. Thank you. So we'll move now to item 8. And just probably might have made this comment at the beginning of the meeting, perhaps, but really the people will be aware that the agenda for this meeting is somewhat smaller than a normal audit risk and finance meeting, in the fact that we don't have some of the normal debt reports and legal updates and so on. And that really is because the recognition that this quarterly report would not actually have come through the system and through potentially to council until sometime next year. And there would have been this huge gap that took place between the financial reporting. So Ms. Harrison was keen to ensure that this actually, we did take this opportunity to push it through at this stage. And so I think that's highly appropriate. So thank you. And with that, I'll ask you to
I've got Claire Knox here to present the report and answer any questions.
So thank you, Claire. Just before I open that up, just also, we will be looking at, it may not, Claire, I'm not sure if it's you or will be Ms. Harrison, but looking for an update on the audit track as well. So whether you feed that in now or we leave Nikki to do that later, I'll leave to you two. But
Good news or bad news.
this is the audit we're talking about. So yeah, normal process. If you would just give us updates that you think are appropriate, and then we'll open it for questions. So thank you, Claire.
So through the chair, first I'll give you an update on the audit. So as we speak, the Audit New Zealand technical team are reviewing some disclosures that we had to make, if you remember, around the impairment testing that Port Nelson provided, and whether that would impact our audit opinion. The conclusion is that it will not qualify our audit opinion, but that there will be an emphasis of matter paragraph, as there will also be one in relation to COVID-19. In addition to that, during, I guess, the review of that impairment, and as well with the airport, where there are no issues currently that we're aware of, Audit New Zealand noted that we had a prior year adjustment error that we need to bring through, and it just impacts the balance sheet. So there should be no major impacts. So that's also currently with them. We've made our changes and they're currently reviewing those. So those are the two items that are outstanding at this point. And I was told that we would hear back from them this week in relation to those matters, and then we can send across the final version of the annual report.
Thank you. I'll take the questions, and if they don't answer it, I've got one as well.
So based on that time frame, when do they think? I mean, we know they're all going on holiday because we were assured of that. So when do they anticipate we will get the final audit through?
So through the chair, we're still working towards that 17th of December council meeting.
Right. It might just be a late report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe that's fairly common anyway, just with changes that go through late. But yes, I believe the 17th of December will be the adoption date.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other points? That was my question. I'm sure it was others as well. Are there any other points, Ms. Knox, you'd like to raise at this stage, or should I open up for questions now?
So through the chair, in relation to my report. So I'll just take the report as read. There have been no changes or updates, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. So Councillor Edgar, followed by Councillor Sanson.
Thank you, through the chair. There is a number, quite a large number, where the comment was the phasing will be revisited and corrected, the phasing will be corrected, etc., etc. So is that a one-off phasing? Is this an ongoing problem? Can you please explain?
So through the chair, yes. So the short story is, so the process is that we, staff do their budgets, and the default is that we do it over the 12 months evenly. We request that staff let us know if that's not the case and that they can sit with us and phase it. They can phase it themselves. We send out a reminder email to make sure that that phasing is done correctly, but there's still budgets that are not. When it comes down to the quarterly reporting, it's found that they're not phased as maybe they should have been. So since all these the current quarterly reports have gone through, I know this probably has come up frequently, and we have gone back to staff to say, right, quarter one, we're done, but for quarter two onwards, please rephase your budgets where relevant. And because there's thousands of lines, it's hard to keep track of everything. But from a finance perspective, we're pushing as hard as we can that staff are on top of their budgets and they are phased to give us useful information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, through the chair. Hi. So my first question is page 34, 4.5.4. Just to clarify, there's a bullet point there about the Maitai area mountain bike trail grade turn 3 and 3 and 4 development. And it says work is being undertaken with the mountain bike club to determine the correct allocation between operating and capital expenditure. I'm just wondering if you could explain that. Yeah, a little more information.
So through the chair, my understanding is that currently the budget is sitting in OPEX, but that it might be able to be might be actual capital expenditure. So I understand that the discussions are with the mountain bike club to understand where it should be coded to and whether it should actually be capital rather than operational, in which case it wouldn't be here.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And then my next question is page 35, sorry, 4.5.5, under depreciation expenditure. I'm just wondering if our forestry assets are depreciated. If anybody knows.
Through the chair, I'm not 100% sure, but I will check and get back to you. No?
No. Okay, just because I'm just the depreciation expenditures over budget by $500,000 due to revaluation. So I was just wondering whether the forestry revaluation of about $2.4 million was included in those depreciation calculations.
Perhaps I could answer that.
Thanks.
So the forestry revaluation is primarily around the biological assets, the trees. So they don't get depreciated because they're a biological asset. In terms of the forestry assets, the other ones, the roads and the bridges, there's some anomaly where they get expensed every year. So they're not actually in the asset schedule of council. And it is one of those things that we'll pick up and talk with council finance team about. But simple answer is no, because they're not actually recognised as assets at this point on the council book. They've been expensed.
Thanks for clarifying that, John. Really helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
So, sorry, so through the chair, can I clarify that this revaluation impact is primarily around the three waters? And I think that's what we've got to understand, is that really those three water pipes, underground assets are the ones that have moved substantially in this revaluation.
That's really great. Thanks for clarifying that, Nikki. I just wondered where it had come from. No further questions from me at the moment.
Thank you. Any further questions? Just while people are considering that, I'd just refer to page 36, item 4.6. And as somebody who every time he's seen this graph for the last umpty years has expressed concern at the early variation on the line of the curve, can I please commend everybody for the way that this is actually tracking so satisfyingly over this period. And I appreciate this is one of those things about the evidence of the value of the changes, I think, to that procurement policy, the fast track approach. But I would be remiss in not giving acknowledgement when I've been so keen to give criticism. So I think well done on that. Other questions? One other question, sorry.
I just wanted to point out, sorry, one of the remiss of me is that we've actually added that Nelson Plan financial oversight section to the report, and that's just following through on the fact that it's during the annual plan deliberations there was a reference to pulling that through to this committee to have an eye on. So what we've done is this will come through regularly to this committee, just an oversight of those risks around the program, and we've also attached the project sheet, the Nelson Plan project sheet, to the very back of the program as well, which would also concurrently go to the Environment Committee, but it gives the ability for us to discuss the Nelson Plan at this committee.
My next question was going to be around that, but I'll take Councillor Edgar first.
Just with your indulgence, I didn't have a question, but I just was very thankful to see this. I was the person who had moved that resolution to have the Nelson Plan come through to Audit, Risk and Finance, and so it was really good to see that in there and just appreciate the work. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Mayor?
Just in relation to 5.34 on page 37, this is just the highlighted under the Nelson Plan financial risk oversight. The comments are there in relation to the Randerson report that the government has with recommendations to the government about changes to the RMA. I think the timeline for that is likely to be signal from Minister Parker that we're likely to see a bill heading to select committee by perhaps middle of next year, middle third quarter, with a reasonably swift process to take it through submissions into select committee and then through into the readings in the House for legislation. It's going to be a much faster process than you would normally see for a major legislation change. So it's not going to be a process where a discussion paper, from what we understand, comes out to communities and we all feedback, and then there's the toing and froing before it gets to the bill stage. It's going to go straight up into the legislative pathway. So that may have impacts, as is noted here, on terms of the changes that additional changes that now then need to be incorporated into the Nelson Plan. So I think we've just got to be mindful of that as we're monitoring the risks on this particular project. It is a very dynamic environment, and equally there are the freshwater work that is still working its way through in terms of what that might look like and how that's going to overlap with any changes that happen with the Resource Management Act. And then consequentially will come the climate change related adaptation work, but that signal at the moment that we're getting is that may be in the next term of government, not this term of government. It may start, but we may not see the changes. So I just wanted to highlight that that paragraph is of quite some significance to the plan, to the planning team.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and that's answered one of my concerns that I was going to raise in relation to that. I just the being aware of unspecified risk is something that always catches my attention. So thank you for that. Are there any further questions of Ms. Knox or any other comments?
I'm happy to
Councillor
move it
Sansom?
whenever. I'm happy to move the report whenever.
Okay, thank you. I have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Edgar, for seconding. Is there any further discussion on that? And thank you for bringing that to us at this point rather than next year, both of you. So all those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you.
Before we do, sorry, I'm just wondering if I may raise a matter.
Yes.
So I guess, unfortunately, John, Mr. Chair, you weren't at the second of the restructure meetings, I think, that was held, the post-COVID recovery restructure. And we had one on the 5th of November where we confirmed the different committees. I expressed my concern about being allocated to this committee when I had requested for protest reasons. Actually, it was kind of an affirmative action on my part to be removed, but the Mayor did reassure me that with the concerns that I had around transparency and other matters, that this was absolutely the place for me to be and that I would have the opportunity to raise those. And I'm just wondering if I may raise one matter that is of concern at the moment. So if there's no other matters on the agenda, do we not have general business and is there no opportunity? Right, okay.
Apparently not, but Councillor Sansom, I'd be very happy to have a discussion with you afterwards, and then if there's something that's appropriate for us to bring back in an appropriate manner to the committee, I'd be very happy for it to be handled appropriately in that way, so that your issue isn't lost. But we comply with a process that is somewhat forced upon us. So perhaps you and I can have a discussion about this, and then we'll see where we take it from there.
I would really appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing else, would somebody move that we go into public excluded? Thank you. Thank you. That was Councillor Edgar and Councillor Laurie. All those in favour, please